Hey, listeners, welcome back to Sustainability Street, our podcast on the intersection of commercial real estate and the world we live in. I'm your host, Therese Fitzgerald. My guest for this episode is Stephanie Greene, who was recently appointed as Cushman Wakefield's Chief Sustainability Officer and Global Head of Sustainability Services. Greene is taking on her new role in an interesting time. Most owners and occupiers made 2030 and 2040 decarbonization goals when those deadlines seemed far away. Now they're right around the corner, and organizations are pressed to turn sustainability strategies into operational realities, ideally in ways that lower operating costs and improve NOI. Greene has spent her entire career focused on the value creation potential of sustainability, first in the energy business, then at the Rocky Mountain Institute, where she helps shape some of the building performance standards that owners have to conform to today. She then moved to CBRE and now to CNW. She and I discuss a number of ways in which the conversation around sustainability has changed, including the growing impacts of technology and regulation, how resilience is as much a focus as energy efficiency is, and how sustainability is well on its way to becoming simply a better way of doing business. Here's our conversation. Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
And congratulations on your new role at Cushman Wakefield.
Thank you.
As I usually begin these episodes, let's talk about your sustainability journey and the journey that brought you to your new role.
Sure. So my passion for sustainability and clean energy started a long time ago. I'd say about 27 years ago. I took a sabbatical year before college in 1999. And I spent time living in a small village in Ecuador. I also went to India, Nepal, Thailand, and Laos in that year. And when I landed in college and I took a class on climate science, it was actually the impacts on the economy and on people's livelihoods around the globe, particularly in the equatorial regions, that it just really impacted me. And so I decided to major in an interdisciplinary program that centered on environmental science. And I also specialized in economics and policy because I was really focused on how can we bring sustainability into the world? How is it impacting our economy? And how do we take action on it? And I also then 4 years later got my MBA because I really believe that sustainability needs to be part of adding economic value. It's not a cost, it's how are we creating value. So from that time, after my MBA, I had various leadership roles at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. I went after that to lead the buildings team at the Rocky Mountain Institute, which is known as RMI now. And then I went to CBRE to lead. I started in the Americas, and then I took over leadership of their global sustainability consulting team, where I was helping support executing on sustainability work for both investor and occupier clients. And so here I am today at Cushman Wakefield. So I'm 8 weeks into my role as their new Chief Sustainability Officer. And I was really excited to come to Cushman because I think we as a firm are really well positioned to help our clients turn sustainability strategy into operational reality. And so basically our team, I do two things. I help with our overall corporate sustainability efforts. So we have a net zero goal we're seeking to achieve across our own operations, like our leased offices and our vehicles, as well as across our entire value chain, Scope 3. So I'm supporting our work and executing on our sustainability commitments. And then I'm also our global head of sustainability services. So basically 99% of Cushman & Wakefield's greenhouse gas emissions come from our value chain, which is our Scope 3. And it's mostly from our clients. So we have over 6.5 billion square feet of real estate that we manage for our clients globally. That's everything from facilities management to property management to project management. And so my team works with all of these clients, both investors and occupiers, to help support them in achieving their sustainability goals.
Tell us a little bit more about your move from nonprofit sustainability to corporate sustainability.
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I have tremendous respect for RMI and my former team, and I still read their thought leadership and I call up former colleagues there when I want to hear about innovation on what's happening in embodied carbon in real estate, or how do we power data centers better with renewable energy. So I think there's always been and will continue to be a really critically important role for nonprofits in this space. But for me personally, I had reached a point in my career where I was ready to move from helping innovate on the strategy around what we thought real estate should do to actually rolling up my sleeves and helping real estate to do it. And so I wanted to work really directly with building owners, with tenants in real estate. And that often would mean, how do I start translating a lot of the technical work my RMI team did, and bringing it in really plain business language to a tenant, to a facilities manager, to an asset manager or property manager. And so that's why I made the move back. I was at PG&E, so I was private sector, went to nonprofit, and then back to private sector. I think the corporate side is where we can really actually help execute a lot of the sustainability work, the work that we know needs to be done to help decarbonize buildings, to help drive water and waste efficiency, and to really do so while also achieving like core business goals and economic and preserving economic value for businesses.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely are in a position to make a big impact, being that real estate is a big part of the greenhouse gas emissions and such. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'd say, just in case you don't know, or I'm sure your listeners do, for real estate's 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions, right? So that includes the embodied carbon for constructing real estate, right, and ground up development, as well as the electricity used by real estate to power buildings, as well as the kind of on-site emissions from gas, space heating, water heating, et cetera. So it's
Yeah,
a really significant contributor.
I was going to say 40%, but I didn't know if the number had changed. So, from your bird's eye view, what would you say is the state of commercial real estate sustainability today? And how has that changed from, say, 5 years ago?
Yeah, so 5 years ago, there were a lot of really big goals and commitments flying around. So companies were making a lot of science-based net zero commitments. There was a lot of ambition I saw across real estate occupiers, big Fortune 500 companies setting really big goals, as well as real estate investors. A lot of them made science-based net zero commitments, or they partnered with their capital providers to say, okay, for these specific assets, these specific real estate funds, we're going to achieve really big sustainability commitments. And so I'd say, looking at 5 years ago to today, a few big things have changed. And I think the first is that we've moved to a place where now we aren't target setting, but we're actually just executing on those targets. So a lot of companies I work with have near-term goals. So they might have a net zero goal out to 2040, out to 2050, and a near-term goal to achieve that. So maybe they have to hit net zero 50% by 2030, or some have a net zero goal by 2030. But the point is, 2030 felt like a really long time
Yeah.
away 5 years ago, and now it's 3.5 years away, right? So, everyone's taking a hard look at their capital plans, making sure, like, if they have a boiler replacement in the near future, are they set with a plan to make sure that either gets electrified or it has a highly energy efficient replacement, right? How are they actually achieving a pathway to hit that goal, and actually getting it done? And then I'd say the second change that I've seen a lot of is much more of a focus on resilience and value creation in real estate. And I mean, I told you I studied climate science in 2000, right? So for me, it's frankly always been about resilience, but I think it's just a lot more top of the conversation than it's been, I'd say, in the last 5 years. And it's about, making sure investments in energy efficiency are adding value to the asset, right? How are we saving operational costs, which improves NOI? How are we thinking about this all holistically? I think a
Mhm.
big change we're seeing is, you know, incorporating not just energy efficiency improvements, but resiliency improvements at the same time. When you touch a building, if you touch the envelope, are you doing it once? Those kinds of things I'd say are changing a lot.
Going back to targets and goals, now that firms are really, rolling up their sleeves and making it happen, are they adjusting those targets?
I'd say that what I'm seeing, and there's been some recent data and reports that have been released that suggest this as well. Deloitte has put one out that I read that was an interview of a lot of chief sustainability officers. I am not seeing a lot of companies pull back from those goals.
Okay.
There are some larger coalitions around achieving those goals that some companies have pulled back from, like the Net Zero Banking Alliance is
Mm,
not something that, like, a lot of financial services firms were part of that. That's an example of kind of a broader coalition that is not moving forward, but it's the actual individual company goals remarkably are not really changing
mhm.
as much as one might think.
You work on behalf of large corporations and large real estate owners. What are the chief concerns for tenants, would you say? And what are the chief concerns for investors? How do they differ and how do they overlap?
Sure. So I'm going to actually start with where they overlap because they come at real estate from and sustainability from different places, but I do see a lot of commonalities. And also, I want to clarify, I'm going to use tenant and occupier interchangeably. We usually call it occupiers here at Cushman and Wakefield, but yeah, so occupiers, tenants. So I'd say that across both of those clients, everyone wants to save money.
Hmm.
So, what I really love about this work is that we are doing work that helps clients identify cost reduction opportunities in their facilities, in their assets. And we're doing this through energy efficiency, we're doing this through operational improvements. And I'd say, people have been talking about energy efficiency for years. Every time I work with a client, we find some unrealized energy efficiency opportunities. So there's lots of low-hanging fruit investment still to make in things like LED retrofits and things like thinking about renewable energy procurement to lock in a fixed energy price so that they're not dealing with fluctuations in their electricity procurement costs. So there's just a lot of cost saving opportunities we continue to see among our clients. And then I also hear both investors and tenants come to us with a concern about how they're going to hit those net zero goals. So I told you before, it's like, okay, now we're 3.5 years away from 2030. What are we doing? And really helping work with them to marry up their sustainability plans with their capital plans, because I think often those can get siloed within an organization where they have the sustainability person working over here, and then they haven't actually tied that to the boiler replacements that are scheduled, to the roof upgrade that are, like, we know there's a roof replacement happening in 3 years. Like, how are we really integrating that, setting aside the capital and making sure that we're measuring the cost of those sustainability interventions with the incremental cost of replacing that boiler, not like the total cost. Because we often find there's a lot of, like, I worked with a client that we were swapping out a bunch of boilers for heat pumps, and it was actually cheaper to replace with a heat pump than a boiler, just in terms of upfront capital cost.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, I think, is really where we're having clients. And then in terms of where they're different, so obviously tenants do not. Well, we have occupier clients that some own some of their major buildings, right? So large Fortune 500 occupiers, they might own their major office, their major
Hmm.
headquarters. So it is a mix of ownership and occupancy where they're tenants, but I'd say they're planning on owning those buildings for a super long time. Those buildings are not part of a fund. They're not planning to exit from those buildings anytime soon. So I'd say that those tenants are often really concerned about thinking through how do they need to partner and assess their overall facilities, like how do they need to achieve net zero across hundreds of assets.
Hmm.
And investors need to do that too, but it's a little bit of a different angle because they need to look at, well, how many of those assets are they going to exit within 5 years? How many of those assets are they going to exit within 15 to 20 years? And so, but both of those clients are coming to us looking at help us prioritize, help us understand where do we need to touch a building in our portfolio, help us understand where we should prioritize retrofits and where our highest emitters are potentially from the investor side. What are the assets with the highest stranded risk potential, right?
Hmm.
Um, and then I'd say also for investors, they are much more worried than tenants are about stranded asset risk generally, right? So thinking about making sure they're in compliance with building performance standards. One just tangible example I'll give you. So in the UK, they have an energy efficiency legislation where they have letter grades for buildings, right? An EPC certificate. So
Hmm.
they range from A to G, right? A being the best, G being the worst. And so that legislation's changing. So basically, starting in 2031, all commercially leased buildings that are over 1,000 square meters in size, they have to have an EPC score of B or above. So if you're an investor and you have assets that are C or below, right, you have to be building the cost of the retrofit into your capital plan. You need to be thinking about, are you going to exit that asset? What's the value of that asset going to be if you don't make those upgrades, et cetera?
Yeah. And here, of course, we have building performance standards. Are they, would you say they're similar in terms of their impact on investment and finance?
Yeah, so definitely. So there's 16 active building performance standard regulations in the US. Those are across, there's some city specific ones, and then there's some that are statewide, like Washington State has a statewide clean building performance standard. And then, I'm sure people have heard of Local Law 97 in New York
Hmm.
is one, Berto in Boston, you have BEPS in DC. And so, yeah, I'd say that they definitely are they're moving sustainability from a nice to have to a need to have business conversation, right? They're actually impacting underwriting conversations. Owners need to actually look at these building performance standards when they're evaluating deal risk, right? Like, do they
Right.
want to buy a building in New York that is going to have to spend a certain amount of dollars on upgrades to comply with Local Law 97? I mean, non-compliance will just eat into a building's income. It's going to make the asset harder to sell down the line if owners delay upgrades. But one thing I also want to say about building performance standards, because I think we don't talk about it enough, there's also a carrot with the standards,
Hmm.
right? And I don't think that gets emphasized enough. And it's going to tie back to what I said earlier about sustainability being a source of value creation, which is that it's forcing owners to look at their energy use and often do an energy audit, right? So they actually need to look at their building. They need to think about which energy efficiency investments they want to prioritize. And it ultimately is going to save them money. Like they have an opportunity to touch their building and reduce operating costs. And, if they have a gross lease, this is going to save them money as directly as an owner. If they have a triple net lease, they can talk to the tenant about the on-site solar they've installed or the energy efficiency upgrades they've added to the building to help that tenant save on their energy bills. So all of these things really do directly tie to value.
One thing we talked about in our pre-call is that when you were at RMI, you helped shape some of these building performance standards. Are they having the impact that you thought they would?
I'd say the short answer is yes, they are. I think that we were looking for ways, right, of, the building stock is a huge percentage of the building stock. It's existing buildings, right? And if you look at how are we going to decarbonize that entire existing building stock, we would hope that a lot of owners would do the right thing and invest in energy efficiency and look at paybacks. But for a wide number of reasons, there's often a little bit of a push that's needed to help owners make those decisions. And so that was the intent behind a lot of the building performance standard regulations that I was involved in when I was at RMI. And I do think it is shifting the conversation in a way that's really positive. And as I said, sure, there's compliance, there's fines, there's a stick, but I really do also think it's helping owners see that there are actually value creation opportunities if they're examining their building. So to me, that's the positive side of the BEPS standards generally.
And you said 16 states, or there are 16
16 states and
standards?
cities across
Okay.
the US. Yeah. So Washington State's an example of a statewide one. California is in discussion of a statewide one. They've had Title 24 for years, but
Hmm.
in terms of a standard that actually has, most of these standards, New York's is actually a greenhouse gas emissions standard where you actually have a carbon emissions cap and then you have to reduce accordingly. A lot of the standards are energy efficiency standards. So you have to meet a certain energy efficiency performance threshold.
What do you think is the next frontier in sustainability, in
Yeah,
real estate sustainability?
yeah, it's such a great question. So, I think that it's just about sustainability being just good business. Like it's not a sustainability choice, it's just a good business choice. And I'm smiling because as a sustainability professional, frankly, within my field, like we've been talking about this for years. So Amory Lovins, he was the founder of RMI. That's what he's been talking about for decades, right? Of like, wow, look at all these cool opportunities to save money in buildings and how do we um, bring this to the industry. But I think a lot of the time sustainability does get sidelined as, oh, that's just something we have to do to comply, or that's something we have to do because, we have employees that really are asking us to be forward thinking on sustainability. It's kind of this like extra thing
Hmm.
instead of like the business choice that improves our asset value or saves us a bunch of money on our energy bills. And it's just the choice that a facility manager makes without it needing to be a sustainability thing. So I think that's the next frontier. I mean, I'll just give you another example of
Sure.
outside of real estate, which is electric vehicles. I have an electric vehicle. It took us a while to get one. And we were kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like, is it really going to be worth it? But now myself and anyone I talk to with an EV, they're, I just think they're better cars. I don't have to get an oil change. I don't have to worry about going to the gas station all the time. I can mostly charge at home. There's the car drives better, like it accelerates really well. I think, does it have to be a sustainability thing or can it just be a choice you make when
Hmm.
you're buying a car? It's just, for many people, it might seem like a better car. So I think that's the future within real estate. I think one thing I'll add to is a high performing building, a high performance building is just a better building. I don't know if you've spent a lot of time walking around buildings, right? But a high performance building has a really good envelope, right? It stays cool in the
Hmm.
summer, it stays warm in the winter, has better indoor air quality, it has better natural light. Tenants are really drawn to these spaces. Like you can often see a really noticeable difference. And especially if you're building a building like that from the ground up, new construction, it doesn't actually have to be more expensive to build. With a lot of the technology innovations we've had
Hmm.
over the past 5 to 10 years, you can build such a building at cost parity. And so I think that's part of it, right? Is how do we just make a good business choice? What's the kind of building we're going to build in real estate? How are we going to retrofit this asset? It's just a good business decision.
We talked about concerns of tenants, concerns of owners. Are you seeing a lot more green leasing where they're working together on it?
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you raised that. Definitely. I think that we find both on the tenant side and on the investor side, it can be quite difficult to execute on their sustainability goals and their asset if they don't have some
Hmm.
bare minimum level of green leasing and standards in place. And at the most basic level, this is often just about information sharing, making sure, a tenant that might have a net zero goal, they need to have access to their energy bills. They need to be able to understand and report against their emissions in their real estate. They want to also be able to have conversations with the owner if they want to make a renewable energy procurement choice, or if there are specific minimum energy efficiency standards they want in the building. I've also had some really interesting conversations with forward-thinking tenants and forward-thinking investors, and they're both like, oh, but I don't want to bother my tenant with that
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And the investor's like, oh, but I don't think my tenants would be interested. I'm like, have you guys talked to each other?
Yeah.
So I think there's a ton of opportunity there. And, I'm also seeing it increasingly. I worked with a client that was a European headquartered bank, and they were looking for a new space in New York. And they had a lot of sustainability goals they needed to execute across their portfolio. And so they actually built a lot of green leasing requirements as they went out to bid for the lease, and they went to a bunch of different owners for pricing. That green lease standard was actually part of the broker's negotiation.
Hmm. And then we can't talk about the future without talking about technology. What what impact is that having on facilities management and sustainability?
Yeah, I am really bullish on technology. I'm really excited to see how the space has changed. So I think I mentioned this a bit before, but just to go into a little bit more detail about what my team does, because I think it'll shape how we're using
Mhm.
the technology. So we do everything for our clients from we'll help with sustainability strategy and goal setting. We'll help them with energy management and data gathering. So helping with like utility bill pay, but also aggregating the data from those
Mm-hmm.
utility bills. We help with green building certifications, energy audits. We help with climate risk assessments. We help with building performance standards compliance, greenhouse gas inventories. And so technology for all of those service offerings is definitely making our work a lot more efficient. So there's a lot of new technology tools that have come out in the past 5 to 10 years that enable portfolio-wide energy insights, right? So an
Mm-hmm.
owner or an occupier can look across their full suite of assets, tie data to their BMS system to understand which facilities are performing well, which ones have outsized energy use, how do we use that to prioritize across our portfolio. We're also everything from greenhouse gas inventories, climate risk assessment, energy audits have tools now that can help facilitate and speed up that analysis
Mm-hmm.
work. We also have a number of internal tools, tech tools that we use with our clients. And then we're also AI enabling a lot of our workflows. We want to provide efficient work for our clients, right? And be fast
Right.
about it. There's hundreds of buildings we're dealing with for these clients' portfolios. And so, how do we help them get insights faster? Um, One tech tool I'll just call out is Jupiter. We have a partnership with them to do climate risk assessments.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of great tools out there to do climate risk assessments, but these tools are really helpful, right? They help look across an entire portfolio, assess climate hazards under different climate risk scenarios, and then we overlay that with our team's expertise to help them understand across their portfolio, okay, like how do they take this information and figure out what portfolio decisions do they need to make, right? Are there asset exit implications for any geographies? Do they need to do asset specific assessments to do some resilience
Mm-hmm.
assessments on the ground where they might need to prioritize certain building interventions? For occupiers, we're seeing them increasingly excited about climate risks to understand they have a lot more flexibility, right? So as they think about where they're going to do a new leased office headquarters, they want us to run climate risk tools to figure out we'll run Jupiter and say, these are some locational considerations you should have, right? Because it's not just about the asset for the occupier, it's also about what's going to happen with labor availability,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to have a headquarters in a place that's going to have major heat stress or wildfire risk,
Right.
are you going to get the staff and workforce you need to do your business?
Yeah. It affects a lot of things.
Yes.
Climate.
Yeah.
Um, okay, Stephanie, this has been great. One question I always ask my guests as a media person, I'm always interested in what you're reading or listening to or who you're following that you could recommend to my listeners?
Sure. I am more of a reader than a podcast listener, I'll be honest. I love podcasts, but in terms of volume, I'd say there's a few core podcasts I go back to. On the real estate sustainability side, I really do love David Roberts, his Volts podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think he talks about way more than just real estate, but a lot of his guests have technology or information that's applicable to real estate, and I think is really insightful for, especially for a non-content expert. There's a sustainability adjacent podcast I'd recommend called Good Towns. Something we didn't talk about today, and but is often really critical in real estate, is just thinking about density and location and siting of, creating good urban spaces
Mm-hmm.
and the impact that can have on minimizing commuting, carbon emissions, and creating better walkable living urban environments for people. So Good Towns talks a lot about that. And then on the reading side, I really like New York Times Climate Forward newsletter,
Mm-hmm.
really love Canary Media. I also really love RMI, as I mentioned. I continue to read their thought leadership pieces to inform my work. And then I also look at Trellis.
Okay. Great. Well, good luck in your work. Thanks for being my guest.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
My pleasure. And thank you, listeners, for joining me on Sustainability Street. If you have any questions about this episode or suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to me at therese.fitzgerald@cpe-mhn.com. And don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Bye for now.